The first time he came limping out of the trees, she thought he was just another wild animal looking for food. Dust clung to his fur, and blood darkened one leg where something hung, tied, not tangled, a strip of nylon. Paper flapped weakly beneath it. Sierra froze on the porch steps, breath caught in her throat. The bobcat didn't growl, didn't flee. He just stood there, chest heaving, eyes fixed on her with something more than pain. As she stepped closer, the paper shifted. A name peeked out, one she hadn't spoken aloud in 2 years. She thought he was returning for food, but what he carried told her he came back for something else. By the time the sun had fully risen behind the Dragoon Mountains, the desert was already awake. Birds darted from Ocotillo to Mesquite. Dust whirled in tiny spirals across the parched gravel road. And in the faded wood cabin tucked just past mile marker 12, Sierra Lane finished her coffee with slow, deliberate sips. She had built a life on silence. At 31, Sierra had lived alone for nearly 4 years, ever since her younger brother, River, vanished during a solo hike in the Coronado National Forest. He'd been the reckless one, always daring her to jump into creeks or climb too high. She was cautious, methodical. He was the wind, she was the ground. And when he was declared missing and then presumed dead, she couldn't leave the place that had swallowed him. So she stayed. Her days followed a quiet rhythm: sunrise coffee, trail cam checks, journal entries for the Wildlife Center, and late afternoons watching the desert breathe. She worked part-time as a volunteer for the local rehabilitation clinic, helping transport injured hawks or checking on abandoned dens. But mostly she watched, observed, waited without admitting for what. The bobcats had always been her favorite. They moved like ghosts through the yucca and thorn bush. Quick, solitary, eyes like molten stone. She'd only seen them a handful of times, flickers on the trail cam, or once, at dawn, when a female passed silently across her driveway, carrying something in her mouth. Cubs, maybe. Sierra had stared after her, hand frozen on her thermos, heart trembling for reasons she couldn't name. Today felt no different at first. She was outside, kneeling beside the low adobe planter she'd built last winter, brushing away wind-blown grit from the prickly pear she was trying to coax into bloom. A soft breeze stirred the chimes on her porch. The heat hadn't settled yet. The world felt balanced. And then a sound broke the stillness. Not the flutter of wings or chirp of a cactus wren, something heavier, uneven, footfalls. She stood slowly, wiping her hands on the side of her jeans, and turned toward the noise. And there he was. The bobcat limped across the edge of her yard like a fragment of shadow come to life. His fur was sun-bleached and mottled, patchy along his haunches. Not quite grown, young still, maybe 9 months at most, but the set of his jaw, the quiet defiance in his eyes was all adult, and he was hurt. He dragged his right hind leg as he walked, the limb stiff and awkward. Around it, something blue. Nylon, it bounced against his fur with every step. At first, Sierra thought it was a snare. She felt a rush of anger. Who was trapping out here? But as the bobcat drew nearer, the shape of the object became clearer. It was a strap, and something was tied beneath it. Paper, laminate, a flash of pale green with black text faded by sun and time. Sierra didn't move. She barely breathed as the bobcat stopped 10 feet away and sank to his haunches with a soft grunt, his breath ragged and fast. He didn't growl, didn't hiss. His ears twitched. His eyes found hers and held. That look, it hit her like a wave, breaking over dry earth. Not pleading, not afraid, knowing. She stepped forward, one slow inch at a time, the way she'd been taught in fieldwork training. No sudden moves. Speak low. Make yourself smaller. "Hey," she said gently. Her voice more breath than word. "What happened to you?" The bobcat flinched but didn't run. Closer now, she could see the strap more clearly. Frayed at the edges, pulled tight. And the paper. No, not paper. A park pass. Laminate peeling at the edges. She could just make out the printing. "Fort Bowie Trailhead," she whispered, kneeling. "Issued to—" The name was smudged, faded, but still legible. R Lane. Her throat closed. River. She fell back onto her heel, the desert spinning for a moment around her. The bobcat shifted slightly, flinching at her movement, but didn't retreat. He simply watched. The strap around his leg wasn't trapping him. It had been placed. With intention. A marker, a message, her brother's name. The boy who never came home. Sierra's vision blurred, tears rising like groundwater through cracked stone. She wiped them away with the heel of her hand, staring at the bobcat as if seeing him for the first time. He wasn't just a wounded animal, he was a messenger. It wasn't just the limp, it was the way he looked at her, as if she knew the place he came from. The desert held its breath. Sierra moved slowly, her palms open and low, the way they'd taught her in wildlife courses. She'd approached wounded owls, feral dogs, even a mountain lion cub once during a rescue operation. But this was different. The bobcat wasn't just wild, he was watching her the way people do, with intent. She crouched about 6 feet away, the gravel biting into her knees. The nylon strap was tight, cutting faint ridges into the thin fur around the bobcat's leg. The green laminate fluttered weakly in the breeze, a corner of it peeling back to reveal a date stamp, April 17th, 2023. Her chest tightened. That was exactly 2 years ago, the day her brother had gone missing. "You were with him," she whispered, as if the bobcat might answer. He blinked once, slowly. Then his ears flicked toward a sudden noise behind her, just the wind lifting the porch chimes. But the way he tracked it, the way he stayed grounded, calm despite his injury, it didn't match what she knew of injured wildlife. They ran, they hid, they didn't wait. Her instinct said, "Don't reach." Her heart didn't listen. She crawled forward a few inches and extended her hand, not to touch, but just to get a closer look. The bobcat didn't retreat. His sides rose and fell in fast, shallow breaths, and his nose twitched, taking her scent. There was blood crusted beneath the nylon, old, dried, but no open wound. The strap wasn't the cause of his limp. She reached slowly into her back pocket and pulled out a pair of folding trauma shears she always carried on long hikes. Gently, without pressure, she clipped one side of the strap. The bobcat flinched, a low growl rumbling from deep in his chest, but didn't strike. He allowed it. The strap fell away. Sierra held the laminate piece delicately between her fingers. It was a standard trail entry pass, the kind rangers punched and slip into plastic sleeves for multi-day hikes. Her brother's name was faded but clear. Below it, in thick black Sharpie, someone, River, had written something else. "Brought him with me. If found, follow him." Her breath left her body. She looked at the bobcat, her voice barely audible. "Brought who?" The animal stood slowly, stretching out his leg now free of the strap. He took one limping step forward, then another, toward her porch. His movements were stiff, but not panicked. He moved like a creature who had traveled far, who had endured. Sierra stood too, numb, and followed him. He paused at the porch stairs, looked back at her once, then hobbled up and lay down against the wall beside her boots. That close, she could see the detail in his fur, the dust embedded in his coat, the scars not just from injury, but from survival. He didn't seem afraid of her. If anything, he seemed exhausted. "Okay," she murmured. "Let's get you off that leg." She retrieved a thick wool blanket from the porch chest, one she'd kept since River's last visit. The bobcat stiffened as she knelt again, but didn't flee. She set the blanket beside him and went inside briefly, returning with a bowl of water and a piece of cold rotisserie chicken left from last night. He waited. When she set it down beside the blanket, he sniffed once and began eating, not with wild panic, but slow, measured bites like a creature used to rationing. Something clicked in her chest, a quiet sound like a lock she'd forgotten had a key. After he ate, Sierra sat cross-legged a few feet away, her camera beside her, the strap from the laminate pass coiled in her palm. She knew she should call the local rehab center. Injured wildlife, especially bobcats, weren't supposed to stay in human care. But she didn't reach for her phone. Instead, she reached for her brother's old field notebook, the one he'd left on her bookshelf. He used to sketch the animals they saw on hikes, mountain sheep, javelinas, once even a pair of mating hawks. She flipped to the back pages, scanning his handwriting. There it was, a sketch of a bobcat. Younger? Smaller? Notes scribbled in the margins. Found him at dusk near Ashfork Ridge, too young to be alone. Named him Pine. Might try training him to follow. The sketch matched the animal beside her now, the same amber eyes, the same left ear with a torn tip. "Pine," she whispered. The bobcat's head tilted slightly as if recognizing the sound. Sierra reached for the strap again, running her fingers over the writing. If found, follow him. He had carried her brother's message, across 2 years, across impossible odds. And now he was here. She'd seen tracking collars, even illegal traps. But this wasn't that. This was paper? By dawn the next morning, the desert sky had blushed a pale lavender, stretched thin over the sleeping hills. Sierra sat at her kitchen table, a cup of untouched coffee cooling beside her elbow, and the bobcat, Pine, lay curled against the base of the porch steps, his eyes closed, chest rising in slow, rhythmic breaths. She hadn't slept. The trail pass lay in front of her, weighted by a river stone from their last hike together. Her fingers hovered above it, tracing invisible lines. Brought him with me. If found, follow him. River's handwriting, always a little crooked, like the way he walked. She remembered teasing him about it. He'd laughed, tucked the marker behind his ear, and called it poetic slouch. The sound of that laugh echoed now like birdsong in a dry canyon. Sierra had tried, after he disappeared, search parties, helicopter flyovers, canvassing trailheads with old flyers that curled at the corners from heat. But no sign. No body. Just a silence so dense it became something she carried. Until now. Until this animal came limping out of the mesquite like he had stepped from River's last breath. She looked again at the tag, the date, the handwriting, the nylon. It hadn't just survived, it had been protected. Pine had somehow kept it tied to himself, or River had tied it, trusting the bobcat to carry it forward. She had to know where he came from, how far, what path. She rose, grabbed her field pack, and knelt beside Pine, who stirred and lifted his head. "Hey," she said softly. "You up for a little adventure?" He blinked at her, then turned his gaze toward the east-facing hills. The sun was just beginning to rim their crests in gold. Sierra didn't restrain him, didn't even bring the carrier, just a harness clipped to her belt and her field gear, GPS, first aid kit, trail snacks, and a worn leather journal, Rivers. Pine hobbled forward, his limp still evident but less stiff now. He paused at the edge of the gravel path, looked back at her, and then turned toward the dry wash that led into the lowland trails. Not toward the ridge trails tourists used, but east, toward the old paths, the ones overgrown and washed out by monsoons years ago. She followed. They moved slowly at first, Pine stopping to rest often, but always choosing the path deliberately. No backtracking, no hesitating. Sierra had tracked enough wildlife to know when something was wandering. This was not that. He was leading. Mid-morning, they reached a narrow arroyo where the heat was thinner, shaded by cottonwood and hackberry. Pine paused near a rusted fence post half swallowed by the sand. Sierra recognized it. It marked the old shortcut to Ash Fork Ridge, the place River had planned to explore. She dropped her pack, pulled out the journal, flipped to the last map River had sketched. Same ridgeline, same cutoff. She turned to Pine, who sat panting beside a creosote bush, his ears twitching at every bird call. "How far did you come?" she murmured. There were claw marks on his flank, healed now but visible in the right light. A scar on his left shoulder, ragged and crescent-shaped. He hadn't just survived. He'd fought. For territory, for food, maybe for the right to carry what River had tied to him. She reached out slowly with her canteen, pouring a trickle into her hand. Pine leaned forward and licked the water with delicate laps, not frantic, controlled. Then he lay down beside her boots and closed his eyes. Sierra watched him for a long time. Then she picked up River's journal and opened to the final entry. April 16th, 2023. Took the shortcut. Found a bobcat kitten limping near a dry spring. No mother. He followed me all morning. Let him eat from my hand. Named him Pine. Guess I needed company more than I thought. If anything happens, I hope someone finds this journal. And maybe him. April 17th. Storm last night. Trail washed out. Trying to make it back. Pine's still with me. He sleeps curled up by my boots, like he belongs there. Then the rest of the pages were blank. Sierra closed the book and pressed it against her chest, willing herself not to cry. She looked at Pine. "You didn't leave him, did you?" The bobcat opened one eye. She remembered what the old wildlife vet used to say. Some animals bond stronger than they should, especially the broken ones. Maybe Pine had stayed. Maybe he hadn't just been a wild creature river-fed, but something more, a companion, a witness. And maybe, just maybe, when River fell, Pine carried the only thing left that could lead her back. The tag, the name, the message. A low wind stirred through the canyon, rustling the branches above them. Somewhere, a raven called twice. Sierra gathered her pack and stood. Pine was already watching the east again. The trail continued, and so did they. The tag wasn't to track him, it was to lead her back. By early afternoon, the sun had begun its descent into the shimmering haze that hung over the Arizona plain. The ridgeline ahead curled like the spine of some ancient, buried creature, and every rock and branch seemed cast in gold. Sierra adjusted her pack strap and glanced at Pine, who was now a few paces ahead, nose low, moving slower but steadier. The limp had eased. Whether from instinct or determination, he kept moving. They'd been walking for hours. Her boots knew this terrain. These were the same trails she and River had traced as kids, then again as adults, though back then they'd always joked about taking wrong turns just to get a better story. But that was before. Before one of them never came back. Now there was no joking, only echoes. Pine paused near a bent Palo Verde, sniffed the air, then veered left down a gully. Sierra hesitated. That wasn't a known trail, but her gut said follow him. She did. The path narrowed, the light dimming under tangled mesquite and catclaw. Thorns brushed her arms, snagged her sleeves. The silence here was thicker, not empty, but watchful. Every footstep stirred dust, and with it, memories. She remembered River's laugh echoing through these hills. His constant, reckless confidence, how he always walked ahead, never too far, just enough that she had to call out to keep up. "You're not following fast enough," he'd say, smiling over his shoulder. Now she was the one behind. Following something wilder, but not unfamiliar. Pine stopped again, this time beside a hollow in the earth, nestled between two stones bleached by sun and wind. Sierra stepped closer, her heart stilled. There, half buried beneath a layer of silt and moss, lay the remnants of a tarp, dark green, sun-faded, collapsed into the soil like a folded wing. She crouched and brushed it back. Underneath, the rusted frame of a camp stove, a cracked mug, and a small fire ring, charred but undisturbed. Her throat tightened. This had been River's camp. She could feel it, the way the stones had been arranged just so, how the tarp had been angled to block the wind from the northwest. Little signs, his signs. She dropped to her knees and ran her fingers across the edge of the fire ring. There, pressed into the soft sand, a mark she hadn't dared to hope for, the heel imprint of his hiking boot. Shallow, weathered, but real. Pine circled once and lay down beside the stones, tucking his paws beneath him. "You stayed," she whispered. There was no answer, just wind through the brush and the slow blink of Pine's gold eyes. She sat back, pulled River's journal from her pack, and flipped to the last page again. Her fingers trembled. This place, the tarp, the stove, the quiet hollow, matched everything he described in the final entry. He had made it this far, which meant whatever happened, happened after. She stood and scanned the area, eyes adjusting to shadow and light. And then, not far beyond the camp, something caught her gaze. A path, narrow, almost overgrown. One River would have taken. Sierra moved forward, her boots crunching softly over dried leaves. Pine didn't follow this time. He stayed near the fire ring, watching her. The trail wound up through a notch in the rock. On the other side, it dropped steeply, then opened into a shallow basin where the light pooled like honey. And in the center of that basin, barely visible beneath a crooked mesquite, something jutted from the earth. She moved faster now, heart pounding, breath tight in her throat. It was a cairn. A small stack of hand-placed stones, rough, purposeful. She knelt beside it. At the base, nestled beneath the lowest stone, lay a strip of leather, sun-bleached and cracking. She lifted it with shaking fingers. Attached was a broken clasp, the kind found on a field journal's tie strap. Her brother's. She turned, slowly, looking back the way she came. At the hollow, the trail, at Pine, still lying beside the stones, unmoving, watching. He hadn't just carried the pass, he'd carried the route. Each choice, the left turn at the arroyo, the pause by the bent Palo Verde, even the hollow where they'd stopped, hadn't been random. They were waypoints, places marked by memory, by scent, by some tether Sierra couldn't see but felt with aching clarity. This was how River had guided her home. Through him. Sierra stood in the middle of the basin, the wind rising around her, warm and dry and ancient. She tipped her head back and let it pass over her face. Not tears this time, just stillness, not closure, not yet, but presence. And for now, that was enough. He didn't vanish, he left a path. And the Bobcat remembered. The basin was silent, but it didn't feel empty. Sierra knelt beside the cairn for a long time, hands resting on her thighs, the strip of leather still clutched between her fingers. She didn't cry. Not yet. The ache inside her chest was too deep, too still. like the moment before thunder breaks. Eventually she rose and turned back down the trail. Pine hadn't moved. He remained curled beside the old fire ring, as if he belonged there, as if this patch of earth was part of his own memory too. She moved toward him, slow and quiet, and dropped to a crouch. "Did you wait for him here?" she asked. He didn't answer. Of course he didn't, but he didn't look away either. Sierra reached into her pack and pulled out River's journal. She flipped to the back page again, eyes scanning the margins. One line stood out now more than ever. One she hadn't read with the same weight before. "He follows. Sleeps beside me. Watches everything. I think he knows more than I do about surviving this place." She looked at Pine. "You did, didn't you? You survived it for both of you." And now he was here, alive but limping, scarred, not just physically. She unzipped the side pocket of her bag and pulled out the portable GPS device she used when mapping trail cams. The screen flickered to life and she marked their current coordinates. This place, this hollow, it needed to be remembered, documented, protected. Then something made her pause. On the edge of the screen, faint but steady, a blinking dot, Unit R17, signal located. Her breath caught, the tracker. River had attached one to his bag. She remembered now. He joked that if she wanted to stalk him on his hikes, he'd at least give her breadcrumbs. But the signal had disappeared after the storm. Everyone assumed the battery had died, that it was lost, but it hadn't. She opened the map overlay and zoomed in. The signal wasn't far. Or maybe a mile southeast, along a narrow draw beyond the basin. Her hands trembled as she set a waypoint. Pine stood without prompting. Sierra looked at him, startled by the synchronicity. "You know?" He stepped forward, slow but steady, then paused to glance back at her. So she followed again. The trail was fainter here, not even a game path, just the suggestion of one. Flattened grasses, a broken branch, a place where the undergrowth was thinned by repeated passage. And the farther they went, the more signs emerged. A torn strap caught on a limb, a small metal carabiner half buried in dirt, a blackened bit of nylon tent corner. Sierra's breath was tight. Each step felt heavier, like walking into the heartbeat of something sacred. Then she saw it. The ravine opened without warning, a steep drop, choked by sycamore and brush, hidden from view until the very last moment. The kind of place that didn't show up on maps. The kind of place you could vanish into and never be seen again. Pine stopped at the edge. He looked back once, then sat, motionless. Sierra crept forward, grabbing a mesquite root for balance. Carefully, she looked down. And there, half hidden by rock and shadow, lay what was left. A collapsed tent, torn at the seams, faded orange fabric twisted by wind, and beside it, what remained of a man's backpack. Molded leather, one strap frayed and split. She lowered herself slowly, her hands gripping rock and root. The descent was narrow, brutal on the knees, but her mind was quiet. No fear, no hesitation. Only knowing when she reached the floor of the ravine, the air was cooler. Time moved differently here, like the earth had decided to keep this moment in its chest, unchanging. Sierra approached the backpack. One of the pockets was open. Inside, wrapped in a plastic zip bag, was a bundle of notes. Some were damp, some faded, but one remained legible, written on the same kind of field paper River always carried. "Sprained ankle bad, can't climb out, Pine won't leave, attached marker to his leg. If he finds someone, tell Sierra I wasn't alone." Her vision blurred, not from grief, but from something deeper. A truth so heavy it sank into her bones. He hadn't died alone. He hadn't disappeared into nothing. He'd left something behind. Someone, a creature wild and watchful and impossibly loyal. Sierra sat down on the soft earth, the note cradled in her hands. Above, at the rim of the ravine, Pine waited. She could see his silhouette, still alert, tail curling and uncurling like breath. "You found me," she whispered, and this time she let herself cry. Tears, silent and warm, slipped down her cheeks and landed on the note like punctuation. Grief, yes, but also gratitude, that he hadn't been lost in vain, that someone had remembered, had carried the message across seasons, across time. Pine didn't move until she stood again. She climbed slowly, fingers scraping against rough stone. Her knees screamed, her throat burned, but she climbed. When she reached the top, Pine stood and met her gaze. No sound, no gesture, just presence. She reached out, knelt beside him, and laid her hand gently on his shoulder. He didn't flinch. And for the first time since River vanished, Sierra felt the world tilt back into balance. He didn't die waiting, he died helping. The drive back was slower than before. Sierra kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the carrier in the passenger seat. Pine lay inside, quiet, drowsy from exhaustion and the gentle sedative the vet had administered before they left the wildlife clinic. The limp wasn't serious, soft tissue swelling, the vet said. Clean wound. He'd be fine with rest, fluids and food. He'd survive. Again. They hadn't taken him in as a ward of the state. Not yet. Not with Sierra's credentials and her offer to foster him under provisional rehabilitation care. She'd signed the forms with shaking hands, her name scrawled across the dotted line like a promise. He would stay with her, for now. Outside, the horizon burned with the colors of approaching dusk, amber, bleeding into rose, fading into deepening violet. The same colors as that day 2 years ago, the one she stopped letting herself remember. But now she couldn't stop. It was no longer just a day of absence. It had become a story. Whole, terrible, beautiful. River hadn't been lost to silence. He had left a trail, a message, a living thread sewn into the fur of a wild creature who refused to give up. When they reached her cabin, the gravel crunched familiarly beneath the tires. She parked beside the porch, the same place she'd first seen Pine limp from the trees. That felt like years ago now. She opened the carrier slowly. Pine blinked up at her. Groggy but calm. "Home," she said softly. "At least for now." He stepped out with cautious grace, every movement careful. The limp was there, but not as sharp. He padded toward the porch and curled up in the exact same corner he'd rested in before, beneath the faded boots Sierra had never moved from the steps. River's boots. Sierra exhaled. She didn't rush to unpack. She didn't call anyone. She just lowered herself beside Pine, cross-legged on the porch, and let the silence fall around them like rain. The desert was breathing again. A light breeze stirred the creosote, sending the faint scent of summer storms through the air. Somewhere, a mourning dove called. The kind of call that used to ache in her. But now it felt like something else. A welcome. She looked at Pine. He was staring at the boots. Without thinking, she reached out and laid her hand gently on his back. He didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned ever so slightly into her palm, like the weight of it steadied him. "Thank you," she whispered, "for surviving, for remembering, for carrying what she couldn't." Later, after the sun dipped behind the ridgeline and the stars began to gather like old friends, Sierra prepared Pine a small meal of shredded chicken and soft cooked rice. The vet had advised bland, easy food for a few days. Pine ate with slow, methodical bites, pausing between each as if absorbing more than just nourishment. She watched him from the counter, her hand cupped around a steaming mug of tea. The house was different now, not because of the furniture, not because of the Bobcat, but because she was finally seeing it again, everything in it. River's coat still hung by the door. She'd stopped noticing it months ago. Tonight, it looked like someone might still reach for it. His hiking hat still rested on the shelf, sun-faded and frayed. She walked over and picked it up. It still smelled faintly of cedar and trail dust. She turned back to Pine. He was seated now, staring at the fireplace as if he could see flames that weren't there. The old blanket she'd left folded on the rug had been nudged into a messy nest. She crossed the room and sat beside him. Quiet for a while, then. "Do you think he meant for me to find you? Or did you just choose your own path?" Pine didn't answer, but he blinked slowly, then leaned forward and nuzzled the toe of River's old boot that had been moved inside. A simple gesture. So gentle it cut deeper than words. Sierra pressed her lips together, nodded once. That night, sleep came easier than she expected. Pine remained in the main room, curled near the boots. Once, around 2 a.m., she woke and walked barefoot across the wooden floor just to check. He stirred when she crouched beside him, opened one eye, and placed his chin back down on the faded leather as if to say, "Still here, still safe." She returned to bed. At sunrise, she stepped onto the porch again, journal in hand, tea in the other. She sat in River's old chair, cracked and sun-bleached, and opened to a fresh page. She wrote slowly. Some endings take years to finish. Some returns arrive on 4 legs and don't ask for anything. Today I will not grieve. Today I will remember. Pine joined her just before the last line. He sat beside her chair, tail curled neatly over his paws, and stared into the trees like he was remembering something too. She lost a brother to the wild and gained back something just as untamed, just as loyal. Evening returned with the hush of falling petals. The last rays of sun brushed the tops of the mesquite trees, casting long, gold shadows across the porch. Sierra stood at the edge of her property, where the scrub thinned into the open hills, and watched the horizon breathe. Pine sat beside her. They didn't touch, they didn't need to. The stillness between them was enough. A breeze passed through the grass, rustling the dry leaves like whispers. Somewhere a hawk called once and then again, distant but clear. Sierra closed her eyes and let the sound carry. There was no ceremony, no monument, only the land remembering. Only her heart, softer now, more open, tethered not to loss but to presence. River hadn't disappeared into nothing. His story had travelled, thread by thread, in the steady, silent steps of a wild creature who had once curled beside his boots at night, who had carried his name, his memory, without understanding the weight of it, yet never letting it go. Pine moved then, just slightly. He stepped forward, toward the grass, toward the open, then paused, looked back, and for a single breath their eyes met. Sierra gave the smallest nod. He turned and slipped into the dusk, not vanishing, not leaving, just becoming part of it again. She stood there for a while longer, letting the quiet stretch wide, letting the ache settle into something gentle, something sacred. Then she walked back inside. That night, she placed River's journal on the windowsill, opened to the last page he ever wrote. She left the page facing the stars. She didn't write anything else. There are some endings that do not need words, just presence. If this story touched your heart, stay close. Here on Paw Prints and Stories, we believe some bonds never end. Some stories don't need words, just presence.